When you look back at the first major Marvel villain, the name you predominantly hear is Loki. He is, of course, the god of mischief, so why would anyone else think otherwise? As the villain of the first Avengers film, he made a distinct impact on what a major ensemble antagonist could do in both power and intellect. Because what more can you want when your first major villain is a god, based on the Norse mythology no less, and a trickster and the brother of Thor? This creates a very interesting dynamic that makes the stories feel more personal and raising the stakes to the wider world. On some level, you're fighting not only a monster, but also a family member who delights in who he is in order to gain the ultimate prize of control. But there's also something more to the character than just a simple villain and his journey. And that journey is more important than who the world first saw him as if we want to understand the full lengths of the character and who he really is, and to truly know what it means to be burdened with glorious purpose, and how that purpose affects the world around you, and the consequences of choosing exactly that. Because Loki isn't just a character in the grand scheme of the MCU, he's also the idea of what makes the MCU stories go around, and the delight of knowing it. From his movies with Thor to his very own series, it showcases the journey of a man billed as a monster who learns to become a hero he was truly destined to be. It dispels the narrative he was only meant to be a villain when he wasn't at all. Circumstances certainly suggested otherwise, but the opposite becomes true. Living long enough to see yourself become the hero instead of born to be the villain. And this is a video I've thought about for a long time, especially in the ever-changing role he has faced now, a few years after the finale of his own series, and where that path would take him. To become someone who is more than a villain in the kind that I normally cover, where they are good as they are or transform into something greater and just get their just ends. Where Loki is the one who deserves a fate that inverts that very process, a fate that leads us to understand who he truly is and how a person can matter, what his goals are, and what they really became. The pain of sacrifice, the delusion of want, and the need to be selfless when the moment calls for it is a destiny placed upon someone who's meant for more, even at the cost of themselves, so they can actually truly matter, far beyond what the thrones of kings and gods can do and what they once thought they wanted. So let's just take a look at Loki as the burdened god and the hero he was always meant to be. In the first Thor film, we meet Loki not as the full-blown villain the world would fear later, but as the quieter, sharper younger brother standing in the shadow of a golden heir. He is the prince who has always known he will never sit on the throne, yet still carries the quiet belief he was born to be a king. From the opening scenes, Loki is the observer, the one who watches, listens, and calculates while Thor charges forward with reckless pride. He is clever when Thor is strong, patient where Thor is impulsive, and already skilled in the subtle art of shaping events even without seeming to touch them. What we see early on is a man who loves his family, even as resentment simmers beneath the surface. He truly cares for Thor, he tells him as much, but that love is tangled with jealousy and the lifelong feeling of being second, of never quite measuring up to Odin's eyes. When the Frost Giants interrupt Thor's coronation, it is Loki who arranged their entry, not out of pure malice but as a carefully placed piece on the board. He nudges his brother towards war, knowing exactly how Thor will react, and watches Odin's fury banish the Golden Sun. In that moment, the path to the throne opens and Loki steps into it. Then comes the revelation that changes everything. The moment Loki's hand turns blue against the casket of the ancient winters, and when Odin finally tells him the truth, he knows he is not Asgardian. He is the abandoned son of Laufey, a frost giant taken as a political tool, raised as a prince, but never meant for the throne. The identity of Loki he built his entire life shatters. That quiet insecurity becomes open wounds where he's no longer just the overlooked brother, he is the monster parents tell their children at night about. And in that pain, his wants become clear and desperate. Loki just simply does not want power for its own sake, he wants proof. He wants to be seen as worthy. He wants Odin's love and approval of the same level Thor has always received. So of course, he seizes the throne temporarily during Odin's sleep, not as a conqueror reveling in chaos, but as a son trying to rewrite his place in the story. He plots to destroy the Jotunheim, the very race he belongs to, so he can stand before Odin as the savior of Asgard, the true son who erased monsters. He sends the destroyer on Earth not to purely out of hatred for Thor, but to remove the only rival who stands in his way between him and the long destiny for recognition. But by the end of the film, when the Bifrost is breaking and Odin holds them both, Loki's final plea is not for a kingdom, it's just for acceptance.
I could have done it! For you! For all of us! No, Loki.
When that acceptance is denied, he lets go. He chooses the void rather than live the life as the unloved son. This is the Loki we first meet, not yet the self-proclaimed god of mischief that rules through fear, but a wounded, brilliant, and deeply insecure man whose greatest want is simply just to matter, to be equal, to be chosen. Everything that follows the invasion of Earth, the schemes, and later redemptions grows from this fracture. In Thor, we watch the birth of the burdened hero's long road, the moment where the trickster realizes that the role was given he was never meant to actually play, and begin the painful process of trying to write a new one. To the end of Thor, he does not simply close the chapter, it forges a version of Loki who arrives on Earth in the Avengers. When he lets go of the spear and falls into the void, it's not just a physical drop, it is the moment he chooses oblivion over a life without the approval he spent centuries chasing. Odin's quiet rejection, the no Loki, is the final fracture. The son who tried to prove himself worthy by destroying an entire race is told without words that wasn't even enough, and what happens in that space between the fall and his return is never fully shown on screen, but Tom has described it as someone closer to the Asgardian version of Apocalypse Now, a year of wandering the darker corners of the universe carrying a reservoir of pain, hardening into something sharper and wanting something dangerous. When he reappears, he's no longer the wounded prince seeking a father's love. He is a man who's decided if he cannot belong in Asgard, he will carve out a kingdom of his own, and in that place he will choose the one that his brother loves most, in Earth. This is the Loki who declares he is burdened with glorious purpose, and uses Thanos and his army to get just that. That phrase is not empty swagger, it is the new identity he has built from the wreckage of the old one. Where his purpose was meant to be seen as Odin's equal, is now to rule. He arrives with the Tesseract, the Chitauri army, and a scepter gifted by Thanos, tools that amplify his power and the rage that still burns inside him. Later revelations would suggest the scepter has fueled the hatred further, but the core was already there. He does not simply just want to conquer, he wants an audience. He wants humans to kneel, not just because he can make them, but because their submission will prove he was always meant for more than the shadow he lived with.
Is this not your natural state? It's the unspoken truth of humanity, that you crave subjugation. You were made to be ruled.
Yet even here, the old wounds remain. When Thor confronts him, the conversation is still personal. Loki speaks of imagined slights of living in the shade of his brother's greatness and still frames his actions as a kind of twisted proof of worth. The invasion of Earth, in his part, is an attack on everything Thor values, the realm he has come to protect, the people he has grown to care for, where it is vengeance, but also the kind of desperate attempt of the man who has lost every other path to matter. If Asgard will not have him as king, then Midgard would have him as god. He does this for himself first and foremost, the self that was told he was never enough, doing so to rewrite the story that ended in him falling in the dark, and somewhere beneath the theatrics and cruelty is still a fact he's doing it for the family that rejected him, even if he can no longer admit it. The threat that becomes in the Avengers is not a clean break from the Loki or Thor we've seen before. It is a direct, painful continuation of that final moment on the Bifrost Bridge, a man who tried to earn love through power, failed, and decided the only remaining option was to take it by force. And this is the height of his villainy, a point of where burden with glorious purpose looks more like pure ambition and least like the quiet need to belong that started it all. And it is from this low point, the most dangerous version of himself, that long road back towards something better would eventually begin. After the height of his villainy in the Avengers, the cracks start to show in films like Thor: The Dark World. Loki is no longer a free agent of chaos who once demanded Earth to kneel. He is a prisoner, locked away in Asgard's dungeons, cut off from the power and recognition he once chased. The man who declared himself burdened with glorious purpose is now left with nothing but silence and the weight of what he has done. Then of course, Frigga, his mother, dies. The loss of his mother is the first true fracture in the armor he has built. Frigga was just the only person who never stopped seeing him as her son, even when Odin sentenced him to life in isolation, and even when Loki himself tried to deny her. When news reaches him, the carefully constructed performance collapses. The rage erupts in his cell is not calculated fury of a conqueror, it is the raw, unfiltered grief of a son who's lost the only unconditional love he's ever truly believed in. That pain becomes the bridge between the brothers again. When Thor comes to free him, Loki does not join the fight for power or Asgard's glory, he joins for her. Trust my rage, he tells Thor, where it is the closest he can come to honesty in that moment. He may not be trustworthy in the ways that matter most, especially for Thor, but his love for the mother is real, and it is enough for him to make him stand between his brother he has spent a lifetime resenting. And that love pushes him further than he's ever gone before. He takes a blade meant for Thor, where he appears to die in his brother's arms, and for a moment looks like the ultimate sacrifice, the final proof that something good still lived inside him. But of course, even here, the old patterns hold. The death is a lie, Loki survives, he saves Thor in this moment, and returns to Asgard in secret. He takes the throne by impersonating Odin and still wants to be seen. He wants the recognition that he's always felt denied, where the method has not changed enough. The need to matter still overrides the quieter growth beginning to take root. And by the time Ragnarok begins, that need has grown quieter but no less present. Loki has ruled Asgard in disguise for years, staging plays that celebrate his own heroic death, surrounding him with the applause he could never earn on his own skin. It is the purest expression of the core wound that he still wants to be loved, admired, chosen, but only on terms that he controls. When Thor unmasks him and forces him to face the truth of what he has done to their father, the performance starts to finally crack for good. Odin's death is also the second quieter breaking point. There is no grand confrontation this time, it is only an old man on a cliff in Norway, calling them both his sons one last time before he fades.
I love you, my sons.
For Loki, who has spent so long believing he was never truly one of them, those final words matter more than any throne, and the indifference that Thor showed him afterwards, the sense that his brother has finally stopped fighting for him and stopped expecting better, hurts in a way that the old hatred could never. The opposite of love is not hate, it is being left behind. And so, when the choice comes to Sakaar and later in the fight on Asgard itself, Loki begins to move differently. He still schemes in most of the film, he still hesitates, he still looks for the angle that keeps him safe, but when the moment arrives to abandon his people or stand with them, he chooses to stand with his brother, helping Asgard evacuate, returning for the final battle. The methods are still imperfect, but that old instruction to protect himself has not fully died, but the direction sure has changed. The man who was once tried to destroy a realm now risks his life to save what remains of one. These two films do not complete his transformation, but they do something very important. They break the version of Loki who believed in power and recognition were the only ways to matter. Frigga's death forces him to feel, and Odin's death forces him to accept. And in between those two losses, the desire to be seen begins, shifting into something that one day he might earn by choosing differently. The work is far from finished, but the cracks are there, and through them, the light is starting to get in. And in the main timeline as we know, Loki's story reaches its final irreversible moment aboard the Statesman. After everything with the schemes, the betrayals, and the slow painful steps towards something better, Infinity War opens up with Thanos already having torn through the surviving Asgardians. Heimdall is dead, the ship is burning, and Thor is restrained and powerless. And Loki, the man who once demanded the universe to kneel, is left with one last choice. He tries the final trick, offering the Tesseract, claiming allegiance, and when he does, when the moment comes, he tries to lunge forward Thanos with a dagger, declaring himself Loki of Asgard and Loki Odin's son, burdened with glorious purpose. The line that once showed reign with arrogance and entitlement now carries a different weight. He's not reaching for a throne, he's reaching for the one thing that left matters to him, the chance to stop the monster who has already taken so much, and to give his brother a final sliver of hope. Thanos does not hesitate, he does lift Loki by his throat and crushes the life from him, and drops the body at Thor's feet with a cold finality. For the first time in the MCU, the god of mischief does not get up. There is no illusion, no clever escape. The death is real, and in that moment, the truth of who Loki has become is laid bare. The man who spent a lifetime chasing power and recognition dies to protect the one thing he loves. The pain that shaped him, the rejection, the isolation, the desperate need to matter, ends not in another grab for the throne, but in a quiet failed act of selflessness. It is sad, it is incomplete, and it is fully honest. In the sacred timeline, this is where the story for Loki finally concludes, and how Thor is shaped by that to avenge him later on in Endgame. However, Marvel does not leave this journey here. Endgame still creates that opening during the time heist where the 2012 version of Loki, after his defeat at the Battle of New York and still fully the same with the wounds and ambitions, has a chance due to the failure of Tony Stark to escape with the Tesseract. That single act of chaos branches the timeline and pulls in a different version of Loki into the story. This is not a resurrection of the man Thanos killed, it is the second chance given to an earlier, unfinished version of him. The series that follows is that continuation of the main timeline that we never got to see. This variant is forced to confront the full weight of the life that he would have lived, the deaths of Frigga and Odin, and the slow shift towards something better and final, the lonely end of Thanos' hands into something more. He watched the path that once led to his sacrifice and is given the rare opportunity to choose differently. The pain does not disappear, and the need to be seen does not vanish. But the journey that was cut short in Infinity War is allowed to keep moving forward in a different form, at the behest of someone like He Who Remains. In this way, Loki's death is both an ending and a beginning. For the original, it is the quiet proof that he had finally become someone who's willing to die for something more than himself. For the variant, it is the map of what he could still become, and the warning of what happens if he fails to change. The burden of glorious purpose does not end with a snap on a ruined ship, it continues with a different life towards a different kind of throne. The road from villain to hero was never going to be clean or complete in a single lifetime. Marvel just simply refused to let the story stop when his first life did. The Loki who arrives in the TVA in the first episode is still the man who walked out of the Avengers with a stolen Tesseract and a mind full of unfinished conquest. He has not lived through the years that softened the original, still certain that the universe exists to be ruled by someone clever enough to take it. That certainty collides hard with the reality of the time variance authority. Magic does not work in that area where the Infinity Stones are paperweights in a drawer. The Avengers' time travel was supposed to happen, but his escape was apparently not. For the first time, Loki is confronted with authority that does not care about his titles, his lineage, or his glorious purpose. He is not a god here, he's just a variant and a deviation meant to be pruned. And Mobius is the only one who thinks he has a purpose to be called in, while pressing the knife inside him, still being calm, curious, and unimpressed by his theatrics, where he does not treat Loki like a threat, he treats him more like a puzzle. He shows him the highlights of his life that he's not yet lived. All that footage does is force Loki to watch the path that leads him to nothing but pain. The man who once claimed he was born to be a king is told that he was born to cause pain, suffering, and death, so that others could be their best selves. The question then cuts the deepest is simple. Do you enjoy hurting people? And Loki's answer, when it finally comes, is the first real crack in the performance. He does not enjoy it, he simply never had.
I don't enjoy hurting people. I don't enjoy it. I do it because I have to, because I've had to, because it's part of the illusion. It's the cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear. A villain.
In that quiet admission, the episode does not transform him. He's still the same man who wants a throne, he's still the same man who schemes for an audience with the timekeepers the moment he sees an opening, but it simply shows the truth that has always been beneath the arrogance and mischief. The hurting was never the point, it was the armor. What the first episode reveals is not a new Loki, but the one who has already existed beneath the roles he has played. The need to be seen as strong, the fear of being exposed as weak, and the belief in power as the only thing to matter. Mobius does not fix him, he simply holds up a mirror and forces him to look. And for a man who has spent a lifetime performing, being forced to see himself clearly in the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to him, the journey shifts into something better and does not begin with a sudden change of heart. It begins with the uncomfortable recognition of who he has always been. From the moment Loki leaves the Time Theater in the first episode, the rest of season 1 is a slow, reluctant work of becoming someone new. He still reaches for his old habits, lying, scheming, and doing the angle that pushes him on top, but the people and circumstances around him keeps forcing him to choose differently. The search for the timekeepers, the confrontation with his own variants, and especially the relationship with Sylvie all chip away at the armor he has worn for so long. The softer side that has always existed beneath the performance begins to surface in quiet spaces. With Mobius, it starts as reluctant partnership and grows something closer to friendship. Loki still tests him, betrays him, but he's still met with the patience rather than the rejection he expects. The TVA also becomes a strange kind of found family, Hunter B-15's awakening and small acts of trust, and the realization that the people around him are variants too, lost, used, and searching for meaning just like he is. And for the first time, Loki is not the only one carrying a broken story, he just simply starts to care about theirs. And Sylvie is the mirror that challenges the most. Another Loki, but one who has lived a life of constant flight, hunted since childhood for the simple crime of existing a certain way. On Lamentis, he faces certain death together, but the performance drops. They talk about love, their parents, about what it means to be alone. Loki, who has spent centuries performing, finds himself protecting someone else without calculation. The nexus event that forms between them is not just romantic, it is the first time that they need to connect that outweighs his need for control. He still fights the vulnerability, still hesitates, but the care is real, and it grows stronger than the old instinct to betray really is, all because of the fact this was planned by He Who Remains. In the void, surrounded by other versions of himself like Kid Loki, Classic Loki, Boastful Loki, and even Alligator Loki, the truth becomes unavoidable. Every Loki is an outcast. Every Loki is told the same story where you lose, you cause pain, and you end up alone. Classic Loki's quiet confession that he survived Thanos only to be pruned for missing his brother is a quiet gut punch. The older self who spent centuries in isolation still chose his connection in the end. That younger self who rules a wasteland of discarded things still carries the same loneliness. Seeing them forces Loki to confront what a Loki can be, not just what the timeline has always said a Loki must be. And when classic Loki sacrifices himself to give them a chance against Goliath, it is the clear proof that that change is possible, even for them. By the time Loki and Sylvie reach the Citadel at the end of time, the man who once demanded the universe to kneel has become someone who can stand beside another person and mean it. He still wants answers, he still wants purpose, but that purpose is no longer about himself. He has grown through the relationships he has never expected to keep, with the friendship with Mobius, the fragile bond with Sylvie, and the recognition of his own fractured selves. The softer side was already there, and Season 1 simply gives it time and room to breathe, even as he continues to fight. And in that fighting is the slow choice to care anyway, the burden a hero takes, and another step towards the kind of god he still might become. And at the Citadel at the end of time, Loki meets the one person who has carried a burden heavier than every throne he could ever imagine, the one only known as He Who Remains. Kang in one of his many forms, who is not the grand conqueror Loki once aspired to be. Instead, we meet a tired man who spent countless lifetimes holding the multiverse together by force, pruning every threat and living with the knowledge that this version of himself would burn everything if given the chance. He has already fought the war that Loki can only fear, and has already won it, and that victory has left him exhausted. That revelation changes something fundamental in Loki reaching this finale. For the first time, he is confronted with a version of power that is pure burden. No glory, no applause, and only the endless weight of keeping the universe from tearing itself apart. He Who Remains offers them a choice: kill him and unleash the multiversal war, or take his place and continue the lonely work of control. Sylvie's response is immediate and absolute. Her entire life has been defined by the TVA's theft of her childhood, her reality, and the chance to exist freely. And revenge to her is the only purpose she's ever been allowed. She cannot see past that. The man in front of her is every source of every wound she's had, and killing him is the only ending that she can accept. But Loki, on the other hand, sees something else. He sees the cost, the fear of what happens if he is right. He sees the freedom that Sylvie May wants comes, but at the price of everything and everyone else. The man who once declared himself burdened with glorious purpose now understands that the heaviest purpose is the one that asks you to carry the weight of others, even when it costs you everything that you want. He tries his best to stop her, not because he wants the throne, but because he wants her to be okay, and that confession is quiet and devastating.
I don't want a throne. I just want you to be okay.
Is the clearest proof of how far he's come. The need to be finally seen has become the need to protect. Sylvie cannot hear this. She kisses him and sends him away, back while driving the blade home. He Who Remains dies with a knowing smile and promises that we will meet again as the multiversal war begins again. The sacred timeline fractures into branches blooming like cracks across the sky, where Loki is thrown back into the TVA only to find that time itself has begun to slip around him. And Season 2 opens with that disorientation. Loki is no longer simply a variant in the system. He is time slipping through the TVA's own past, present, and future, and unable to stay in one moment long enough to warn people what he's come to care about. The fact and truth that Kang is the man they have to stop. The man who once looked down on everything is now racing towards the chaos he helped unleash, desperate to hold something, anything together. The encounter with He Who Remains has stripped away the last illusion of what power was supposed to feel like, where conquest is no longer the dream, and the burden is real and is heavier than any crown. In that moment of being sent back alone and unmoored, Loki's journey turns. The question is no longer whether he can seize the throne, it is more about how he can carry a burden that has no glory left in it at all, and whether he is willing to become that kind of person who chooses that weight on purpose. The Loki who races through the first half of Season 2 is no longer the man who once demanded the universe to kneel. He is a man of quest, relentless desperation, not for the throne, but for the people he has finally allowed himself to care about. As we know, the temporal loom is failing under the weight of infinite branches, the TVA is still on the edge of collapse, and somewhere beyond that the growing chaos of the variants of Kang are already stirring. What drives him now is not glory, it is the simple terrifying need to keep the ones he loves from being erased. He throws himself into the work with a focus that would have been unrecognizable in his earlier years. He partners with Mobius and OB to understand what the loom's limits are. He keeps learning, adapting, refusing to give up even when the system has determined to reject him. And when the solution points to Victor Timely, a timid, stammering inventor who also is a variant of Kang, Loki does not hesitate. He still goes after him, not because Timely is a weapon or a prize, but because Timely might be the only person who can keep the loom from destroying everything. That pursuit forces him into direct conflict with two people who represent the old paths he had left behind. Ravonna Renslayer still clings on to the rigid order of the TVA's past, willing to force Timely into the role of the next He Who Remains if it means restoring control, and Sylvie, who is still burning with the need to prevent any version of Kang from rising, and is ready to kill Timely on sight. Loki stands between them, not as a manipulator playing both sides, but as someone who has learned that burning everything down is easy, and trying to fix what is broken is hard, and the more necessary choice. He pleads with Sylvie and tries to protect Timely, stopping Ravonna Renslayer, where every action is driven by the same quiet shift that began seasons earlier. He has learned to care, and has learned to grow. The man who had once hurt people to feel power now risks himself to keep others safe. The desperation is still there, raw, urgent, and sometimes clumsy, but it is no longer the desperation of a lonely god grasping for relevance. It is the desperation of someone who's found something worthy to protect and refusing to lose it. In these episodes, Loki is not the hero who will sit alone at the end of time yet. He's simply a man who has finally understood the burden of glorious purpose is not about ruling. It is about refusing to abandon the people who made him want to be better. And for the first time, that is enough to keep him moving forward. By the time the loom fails, Loki is left alone in the wreckage of the TVA. The people he's fought to protect, Mobius, B-15, Casey, OB, are gone, scattered back into the lives they lived before the Timekeepers even ever touched them. The timelines begin themselves to unravel, and once again Loki starts to slip, but this time the slipping is different. It is no longer random chaos even if it appears. It carries him the exact places where his friends exist in their original lives. A jet ski salesman in Cleveland, Ohio, a doctor in New York, a prisoner escaping Alcatraz, and a science fiction writer in Pasadena, California. The power that once felt like a curse is quietly revealing its purpose. It is not simply taking him to moments or places around history, it is taking him to people. With Obi's help in this version, Loki begins to understand is not the when or the where, it's the who. He gathers them and explains and asks him to trust them one more time. And even when that is not enough, when the timelines start to dissolve around him, or Sylvie herself begins to fade, something finally breaks open. The desperation to keep them from disappearing gives him the control he has already been missing, where he learns to control what is more than a power. It is the first step towards the destiny he is not ready yet to face. Something that only he who remains can only see what is coming, where the multiverse cannot be held by a single loom forever. Something or someone would eventually have to take its place of that machine and become the thing that holds the branches together by sheer will. The time slipping is just the beginning of that transformation. It is the trick or the gift that prepares Loki for a role that nobody else can fill. The one who can move through time itself in order to preserve everything else around him from eventual total destruction. In these final episodes before the end, Loki is not yet the god who will sit alone at the end of time. He's still the man who's just learning how much he needs the people around him. But the control he gains is the first clear sign that the story has already been written by a larger hand. The burden is coming, and this time, the only way to carry it is to become something he has never felt before. And in that, Loki begins the finale in the only way he knows, by trying. Armed with control over time slipping, he returns again and again to the moment before the loom fails and Timely dies. He spends what feels like centuries refining every step and coaching Victor Timely, adjusting the timing, expanding the throughput multiplier, and doing everything in his power to make sure the machine holds. And every time the result is the same. The loom cannot scale to infinity because it was never meant to. The truth comes with he who remains himself. The loom was never a solution, it was just a failsafe. When overloaded, it was designed to erase every branch except the sacred timeline, preserving the one control over reality at the cost of others. The destruction that Loki has been fighting so hard to prevent was always the intended outcome, and the only way to stop it is the choice he cannot make. Kill Sylvie and restore the old order, or destroy the loom and accept that the war that follows. He slips to Mobius, where in the quiet of the Time Theater, the same place where his journey began, Mobius tells him the hard truth of what he's been circling all along. It is the story of a hunter who hesitated, who could not make the ugly choice, and the partner who did. Purpose is not the crown, it is the weight of consequence that you choose to carry so that others don't have to.
Most purpose is more burden than glory. And trust me, you never want to be the guy who avoids it because you can't live with the burden.
How do you live with it?
Scar tissue.
He then slips to Sylvie, who just refuses the idea that free will must be sacrificed for survival. She will not give him the permission to kill her and will not accept that the only two options are control or annihilation. Between them, the third path begins to form. Loki returns to the loom one final time. He locks the doors behind him so that no one can follow, where he finally speaks the words that closes the circle.
I know what I want. I know what kind of god I need to be. For you. For all of us.
And in that, he finally destroys the loom. The branches die in his hands, but from there, instead of letting them fall, he gathers them together, breathes life back into every single strand with his own power, weaving them into something new. Not a single controlled line, but a living tree, Yggdrasil, the royal tree, just like his home in Asgard. He carries the same dying timelines through the rift through the end of time and takes to the throne that was never meant to supposed to be his. Not as a conqueror, not as a king seeking glory, but as the one who stays so that everyone else can keep living. That burden is the weight of every consequence, every life that will now continue because he chooses to hold on to them. The glory is not in the sitting, it is in the lives that are allowed to be, messy, free, unfinished, and real. Loki becomes the god of stories and the living loom, the quiet center of the multiverse, alone on the throne at the end of time, watching over the people he loves so they can never have to carry the same weight. The trickster who once demanded the universe to finally kneel to him finds the glorious purpose in the one act that asks nothing of anyone else, sacrificing yourself to stay behind. And in the end, the way to becoming the god of stories is the quiet and heaviest burden that Loki has ever carried. There's no applause, no parade, no moment where the universe finally turns and sees him as the hero he's become. He instead just sits alone at the end of time, holding every branch of existence in his hands, and the only people who know what he has ever done are the ones he chooses to save. The words he speaks before he closes the doors are not new. They're the same words he promised to Odin on the broken Bifrost Bridge, the same desperate need to matter that drove every scheme and every fall. And now, that meaning has inverted completely into something else. He's no longer trying to prove himself worthy of a throne, he's removing himself from the equation so that everyone else can keep living. It is that same choice he made on the Statesman when he lunged at Thanos and died so Thor can have a chance. It is that same instinct he made when he made him stay with the TVA, that made him gather his friends from their rewritten lives and be together, that made him refuse to kill Sylvie even when the entire multiverse hung in the balance. Again and again, Loki's true destiny reveals he's not meant in the moments he tries to stand at the center, but the moments he steps out of the way. He was never meant to be the hero the story celebrate. He was just meant to be the one working behind the curtain, still carrying the name of the villain, still remembered by most as the god of mischief, and the one who demanded the world to kneel. The people on branches will never know the cause. They will never see the man sitting at the heart of Yggdrasil, breathing life into their futures, because that is the point. The burden of glorious purpose is not because it elevates him, but it's because it what allows every other life to continue. The boy who is told that his life was born to cause pain and suffering becomes the reason pain and suffering do not get the final word. The trickster who spent a lifetime performing finally finds a purpose in silence that no one else would have to hear. That the true message of burden with glorious purpose means that the glorious part is life itself, and the burden is choosing to sacrifice herself because of it. And Loki's story ends the only way it could, not with the crown claimed, but with the crown accepted for everyone else. He matters in the moments that make himself disappear on the stage, and somewhere beyond the curtain where the multiverse keeps turning, free to write its own stories. And that is the burden we can all gloriously live with in the final purpose of life. I'm all done. Goodbye.